Welcome to the Leader's Abstract. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Rutter. As a gerontologist and healthcare CEO, I like to bring a mix of theories and practice to being a leader and developing the next generation of leaders. Today, we're looking at the Dunning-Kruger Effect and the hilarious origin story of this theory where confidence outpaces competence. So before the Dunning-Kruger Effect was a graph, before it was cited in journals, before it became a phrase that you sometimes mutter quietly in meetings or while watching the news, it was two guys in Pittsburgh with lemon juice. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler and his accomplice, Clifton Earl Johnson, decided to rob not one, but two banks in broad daylight, at gunpoint, no masks, because, and this is the important and hilarious part, they had lemon juice on their faces. The logic was simple. Lemon juice works as invisible ink. Invisible ink is invisible. Therefore, if you rub lemon juice on your face, you become invisible to security cameras. No, this wasn't a joke. This was the plan. Wheeler was initially understandably skeptical, which really feels like the most hopeful part of this story. So he tested it. He covered his face in lemon juice and took a Polaroid photo of himself. And when the photo came out wrong, due to bad film, lighting, or pointing the camera in the wrong direction, he concluded it worked. It's science. Lemon juice makes you invisible to security cameras. So off they went to the bank. No disguises, no masks, just confidence. Lots and lots of confidence and lemon juice. Security cameras, of course, captured everything. Faces, expressions, lemon juice shining proudly under fluorescent lights. And the police were confused, but understandably grateful for the great pictures that they had. And surprisingly, Johnson was arrested. And Wheeler remained free until surveillance photo aired on the 11 o'clock news. And it only took about an hour before he was then arrested. And here comes the origin of the Dunning-Kruger effect. When Mr. Wheeler was arrested, his quote was, "But I wore the lemon juice. I wore the lemon juice." As is probably the most tragic sentence ever spoken by a man who misunderstood both chemistry and cameras. So how do we get the Dunning-Kruger effect out of this? A Cornell professor named David Dunning reads about this failed bank robbery and thinks quietly, academically, what? If this man was too incompetent to rob a bank, maybe he was also too incompetent to realize he was incompetent. In other words, his lack of skill protected him from the awareness of his lack of skill. So Professor Dunning recruited a graduate student, Justin Kruger, and they studied this phenomenon. And in 1999, just a few years after the bank robbery, they published a paper with probably one of the most devastating titles in academic history, Unskilled and Unaware of It. They found that when people lack competence, they often lack the ability to accurately judge that they lack. They don't just make mistakes, they make mistakes confidently. And that's how lemon juice became a cornerstone of modern psychology. Not because MacArthur Wheeler was uniquely foolish, but because he was human, and at some point, so are we. Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias where people with low ability in a specific area overestimate their competence. In other words, you lack a skill, you also lack the insight to grade that skill. And so therefore everything looks good, especially your own work. So when Dunning and Kruger plotted this confidence against competence, they didn't get a straight line in the chart. What they got was a very odd-shaped curve that starts with an extremely high peak at the beginning. And that peak is affectionately known as Mount Stupid. Not kidding. This is what it is called in the theory, Mount Stupid. This is where a little bit of knowledge creates a lot of confidence. You've learned just enough to feel dangerous. We've all heard that expression. You watch a documentary, read half an article, sit through one meeting, and you're thinking, honestly, how hard can this be? This is the lemon juice phase. You are in the lemon juice phase. Red alert. At Mount Stupid, everything feels simple. Complex systems feel obvious. Expertise looks overrated. And anyone who disagrees with you is just clearly overthinking it. You don't know enough to know what you don't know. And that brings us to a very interesting yet criticized quote of Donald Rumsfeld from the same time period. Donald Rumsfeld said in a Pentagon news briefing in February of 2002 is that there are known knowns. These are things that we know we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. Fair enough. Fair statement. But there are also unknown unknowns. These are the things we don't know that we don't know. And Donald Rumsfeld, for all of his faults and errors, was onto something there. We don't know what we don't know. And this is where Dunning-Kruger comes into effect. This is where we start to climb Mount Stupid. Now, in my world, healthcare and long-term care, we are full of Mount Stupid moments. And if you're a leader of any type, you've been through this. This is the brand new administrator who says, I don't know why this place struggles. We just need accountability. And then with accountability, the leader starts to learn what's really wrong. This is a leader who skims regulations and announces, this is just red tape. This is the person who's never worked on the units, never taken call at 2 a.m., never sat with a grieving family, but is absolutely certain that they have the solution. On Mount Stupid, healthcare looks like a flowchart, and aging services looks like a spreadsheet. People are variables, and anyone who says it's more complicated than that is clearly resistant to change. We don't stay on Mount Stupid forever, thankfully. We try not to. Reality shows up, and everything collapses. It's what happens next that is important. So you can resist it and stay on Mount Stupid, or you can slide into what is called in the Dunning-Kruger effect, the valley of despair. This is when confidence drops and self-doubt spikes. This is where you're overthinking things at 3 a.m. This is where you realize culture can't be mandated and human behavior does not respond well to memos. Here's the truth. This stage feels worse than Mount Stupid, but it is much healthier. This is where you start to learn. And this is where imposter syndrome lives. Now, as a podcast about leadership, I believe I am contractually and morally obligated to discuss imposter syndrome at least every few episodes. This is something that many, many leaders struggle with. This is the opposite of the competence and confidence curve of Dunning-Kruger. This is where competence is high and confidence is low. This is self-doubt. This is where leaders will often say and think they're going to find out I'm a fraud. They're going to find out I don't really know what I'm talking about. And that's imposter syndrome. That's in the valley of despair, and that is what we have to get past. This is where learning actually begins. You have to stay curious, keep practicing, and listen more than you talk. This is the slowest and least glamorous part of leadership. This is the climb to confidence. It's incremental. It is built on experience, feedback, and humility. When you are learning to become a confident and competent leader, you stop saying always and never. You start saying it depends. You don't feel brilliant anymore. You feel careful. And after time, confidence returns, but it is much quieter. It's less flashy, and Thankfully, less citrus-based. There's no lemon juice involved here. This brings us to the key insight of the Dunning-Kruger effect. The same skills needed to perform well are needed to evaluate performance. And this is where that confidence versus competence spike of Mount Stupid happens, is if you lack the skill to evaluate performance, then you also lack the skill to perform well. And when you don't know what good looks like, everything looks good, especially your own work. One of the bigger problems with Dunning-Kruger and with imposter syndrome is that we often slide back and forth. And so how do we avoid sliding back up Mount Stupid? It's really important to build some guardrails. You should always treat certainty as a warning light. Certainty is rarely mastery. It usually means there's some missing information. Build dissent into your system. Surround yourself with people who will disagree with you. If you are in an echo chamber, that is a situation where you are going to fail. If everyone agrees with you, it's a design flaw. It's not alignment. You should always have someone that disagrees. And if you're a good leader, you're going to listen to those people. You need to also separate confidence from speed. Fast decisions feel decisive, they feel good, but they're not always wise. Last but not least, normalize this saying: I was wrong. You have to admit when you are wrong, because error creates learning opportunities. Leaders who can admit error create cultures that can learn. Here's my closing reflection on the Dunning-Kruger effect and what aging teaches us and what leadership should teach us. Wisdom isn't about being right more often. It's about being certain less often. It's about being able to admit when you're wrong, being able to admit when you jumped the gun, when you had a little too much zeal. The longer you do this work, caring for people, leading organizations, navigating complexity, the more you realize how little fits into simple answers. The most dangerous leader isn't the one who says, I don't know yet. It's the one who says, I'm sure, and I don't need to hear otherwise. Because confidence untethered from curiosity isn't leadership, it's lemon juice. And the goal for all of us is not to avoid confidence, it's to earn confidence slowly. Thanks for listening. This has been The Leader's Abstract.